You're listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt, where we talk about hunting, shooting, fishing, camping, and everything else that the great outdoors has to offer. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. So before we get into tonight's episode, I just wanted to catch up and clarify a couple of things that have been happening. So if you've been following the socials, you would have probably picked up that, yes, it's true, I've got my first deer. Finally got one on the deck. That was super exciting, and I've done a lot of things with it, which I'll get into, but I'll tell you what, the jerky and some of the recipes have been fantastic. Not a secret, but as I said before, I really want to do it with a mate who was along for the whole journey. He's played a really big part, so I think it just makes sense that I have him on the show. So as soon as we record that, it'll be coming out. Secondly, I've had a couple of listeners write in. I always love the feedback, good and bad, and I've made a couple of mistakes. Now, that's cool because I'm not perfect. I'm learning along the way. I've never professed to be an expert. The podcast is really for me to learn, chat to a heap of people that are a lot more experienced than I am, and, pick up tips and tricks as well as giving my own thoughts and opinions, and that's part of growing and learning. So, firstly, the Axel GS Extreme 2.0. Well, I have said a little bit of a porky. I did say that you cannot buy them here in Australia and that I got mine from the US. Well, I did get mine from the US. I didn't know you can actually get them here in Australia. They are brought in by Beretta Australia. Now, they are roughly about $465 on their website. Look, buying direct from the States, you pay about $189 with the conversion rate and, a bit of freight. So they are a lot cheaper to get it direct from the States through Axel. But, hey, each to their own, and you do what you want to do if you are interested in that product. So I can't remember who sent me the information, but I do appreciate that. Thank you for letting us know. The next one is my Weatherby Vanguard Meat Eater Edition. I've been sort of saying how much I don't like the floor plate and then I'm going to move it on. Well, I've had two people reach out and let me know, and I really appreciate you guys doing that. There is a conversion kit. So it's about $100 from, I think it was Cleavers. You can put in the conversion kit and then you run a magazine instead of that floor plate. Is an option I'm going to be thinking about. However, I think I'm really leaning towards the Tikka Aspire in 308 instead. So we'll just wait and see how that one plays out. Lastly, before we get into the show tonight, is the National Feral Goat Abatement Plan. So you might have seen on my socials, I've put up a little thing about that. The reason being is that there's a lot of links to the Feral Deer Plan, and Poison's reiterated its ugly head again. So on that, in the next couple of episodes, you'll see I've got a really fantastic guest who's done some short films and documentaries on 1080, and I'm really excited to publish that one. That was a great conversation. And then I'm going to be breaking down the goat abatement plan as well in the future for you guys. Alrighty, well, without further ado, let's get into tonight's episode. I was lucky enough to talk all things knives, pick up some great tips on sharpening and the like with Dom from DM Blades. So let's get into it. We have Dom from DB Blades joining us to talk all things knives and the like. Dom, welcome to the podcast, mate.
G'day. Thank you for having me.
Oh, look, I am absolutely fascinated with what you do, and I love watching the Instagram and just seeing how you machine it and you make it. Can you talk us through a bit about the process of making the knives themselves?
That's one of those questions where there is a very, very long answer and a ton of different ways.
That's what we're here for.
So today, the process that we start with water jet cutting. So we get these big sheets of steel in from America or from China or Japan or Germany. We bring them to Australia and we get little knife shapes cut out of them. That's the first thing we do. That's probably like the first 5% of work. We've got like a knife shaped object, and then we go on to machining them. So we've got a whole bunch of old school manual machines that we use to sort of cut bits of metal off to make them sharp and pointy. From there, it goes through a heat treat process where we get the knives very, very hot, about 1100 degrees Celsius, and cool them off rapidly to sort of harden the steel. And then we sort of polish them up, make some handles, and make some knives out of them, more or less.
Okay, I've got a heap of questions because as I said, I love watching how it works because it's one of those things that I am not super creative, like from a designing and drawing point of view. I just got nothing. So, how do you get the shapes? Is it something you picture in your mind and then you come up with a bit of a template? Like, how do you go about the actual design of the blade?
It's always in my mind first. I'm not one of those guys who just draws forever and ever and ever. I get like an idea stuck in my head, and it's sort of like a little virus. It sort of just sits there and propagates and evolves, and at some point you just got to kind of make it. And if it's popular, you make more of them, I guess.
So, when you start the process, do you ever sort of start to design something and it turns out and you go, oh, geez, what have I done here? Spent a lot of time and effort and it just hasn't come out the way that I sort of envisaged it to come out?
All the time, all the bloody time, unfortunately. There's a lot of things that you never see on Instagram that just end up in the bin, or we throw on the mezzanine, never look at them.
But how much time does it take to make a knife, like start to finish? How long does it take? Because it seems like a bit of, I know the Instagram clips are quick, but it seems like a lengthy process.
Yeah, it's a very, very long process. How long it takes really depends on the knife. So there's some knives that we can make in about an hour, maybe two. That's very rare. And then there's other knives that I've worked on for 30 hours. There's a huge difference depending on the knife it is. There's just a heck of a lot of work in them. There's so many little steps and processes. We're combining so many different aspects of manufacturing in to make these things. We're doing woodworking, we're doing metalworking, heat treating, surface grinding, all these different things all combine to make a knife. And any single one of those can go wrong, and it's a heck of a lot of work to fix it sometimes, or you throw it away.
I'm guessing with the woodworking that you're mentioning, that's going to be the handle.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have a range of handles that you create? Do you have a bit of a favorite one you like to tinker with?
They change for every single knife, more or less. Every single time we make a new design, it has its own handle, more or less. At the moment, we've been doing a lot of the machine-style handles off the CNC router, which has been an absolute game changer. But we also still do carbon fiber handles or wooden handles, that sort of stuff, all shaped out the old school way, with files and grinders and sandpaper, more or less.
How did you get into this? Like, it just seems such a cool, I sort of envisaged that as a bit of a hobby. Look, it blows me away. I've just had a knife made for me for my 40th by Frank, and he's been on the podcast before. Shout out to him. He made this beautiful little blade with a deer antler as the handle, and just, it's amazing, very thoughtful, and I'm really appreciative that he made it.
Awesome.
How did you just, like, I can't even imagine me making something like that. So how did that start for you?
It was I like to say it was a misspent youth. I've always sort of made knives, and I've dicked around and made stuff my whole life. Probably the first thing I ever made that was pointy, I was maybe 10 years old, and I just sort of filed something out of a piece of galvanized steel I found lying around. And that just sort of progressed as time went on. I made some crossbows out of just sticks and stuff and, kid shit. And then at some point I ran across a YouTube video about making a knife out of a file, which I then tried to do and horrifically failed at it. But then I tried again. And I think when I was about 14, I made my first proper heat-treated knife. And it kind of just progressed. When I was about 17, 18 years old, when other people were going off to work at Macca's, I made knives and sold them. Like a cocky little 18-year-old, I made $1,000 a month and I thought I was loaded. So I left school finished school at 18 and went straight into full-time knife making. And that's been, I'm now 27, so that's been 9 years of full-time knife making.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, congratulations, because I'm a teacher. So when I hear someone that has, started young and they've got this passion and they've just researched it and played around with it. Like you mentioned something there, the first one was a bit of an epic fail. And I always sort of instill in people that for me, a fail is actually, it means a first attempt in learning. And that, it's not a fail as long as you are learning something from it and getting better every time you do something. So I love hearing stories like yourself saying, I started, didn't know what I was doing, but I just kept learning along the way and developing my skills and getting better and better. That's awesome. So so tell us a bit about the business. Like, where are you guys located? What do you find the most? What do you find you make the most of? All those sort of things, mate.
Well, the business has gone through a whole bunch of different evolutions over time. When I first started, we made really, really high-end knives. So we were making knives for, $1,000 for folding knives and that sort of stuff, very high-end stuff. And then as time went on, I kind of got sick of it. I had a lot of really good customers, but there was a certain expectation and a certain clientele that you have to kind of pander to that I wasn't a huge fan of. And that industry of the really high-end stuff, a lot of it's like dealers and art dealers and that sort of thing, and they kind of take advantage of you, and I wasn't a huge fan of that. So in the last 2 years, we sort of focused more on what I would consider production. So instead of making 100 or 200 knives a year, we make thousands of knives a year, which is mostly hunting knives, outdoor knives, everything, kitchen knives, everything pointy more or less we sort of do with the set range, and really try and bring Australian manufacturing to the people.
Whereabouts are you located?
Sorry, I missed that. We're not located in Melbourne. We're about 40 minutes out of the city in Bayswater.
Yeah, nice. So let's talk about the hunting knives, because there's such a variety out there. What do you find most people want?
Most people want something simple and approachable, I find. They want something that looks like a hunting knife and they can understand what it's used for instinctively. If you try and do anything too fancy or functional, you lose people pretty quick. So I found that what sort of sells is something with a lot of belly, so they have a lot of surface area there to sort of get inside an animal and to cut through some skin. And then something sort of controllable and sort of a good size range. Now, when it comes to knives, everyone's got an opinion, and I'm sure there's 100 different ways of sort of doing it, but that's sort of what I tend to lean towards, and that's typically what sort of goes fairly well. Then there's other things as far as how you grind the knives or how thin the knives are. So you see like a lot of these videos on Forge and Fire and all these sort of shows and stuff where they try and hammer their knives through a steel drum or something, which is fine. We can do that. But if you want a hunting knife, you want something very thin that can really, really just cut through meat beautifully. So finding that balance of how thick do you want that edge or how thick do you want that knife to be able to still withstand a little bit of abuse, but still have it thin enough where it'll actually cut through something and work nicely as a knife.
So on that, we're talking about steel. Is there a massive difference in steel when you're making a knife?
Yes and no. The steels we use for knife making aren't your common mild steel or your common stainless steel. There is a lot of different options as far as steel goes to achieve the goal you want to achieve. That being said, there's a lot of hype in the knife world about different steels, and I'm very, very confident that if you took one knife out of one steel and one knife out of another steel, as long as the heat treat's good and the guy knows what he's doing, the average customer will not know the difference. So there's a lot of guys trying to sell you the really, really high-end steels and charge stupid amounts of money for it. And if that's what you're after, that's great. But for most guys, I think you'll be happy with a simple steel like Nitro V, 154cm, 01, something true, honest, easy. You can sharpen it easy. You're not going to need special equipment or gear to sort of get the job done and use your tools.
All right, on sharpening, because it's one thing I find. I've tried a range of sharpeners to try and work out what I prefer and what's best. How do you go about sharpening the knives? And is there some tips and tricks from someone that does it regularly for, the common punter out there?
Personally, we use belt sanders, and we use specialized mechanical equipment to sort of sharpen our knives because we need to be able to do it in a minute or two, right? But for your average guy, I always recommend diamonds, so diamond flat abrasives. Easy Lap's a great brand. I have a few of them, and they work great. Personally, for a diamond stone, I only use a 400, right? Because in my opinion, it's not really worth going up to a higher level. I just want to get an edge on there and get the job done, right? I don't want to dick around there and go up through all the grits and all that sort of stuff. 400, if you know what you're doing, you can get an edge on there that you'll shave your face, but still be sort of toothy and grippy enough to sort of cut through meat properly or anything properly, more or less. As far as tips go, I think a lot of new guys, they aren't very consistent with their angle. So they're either holding their angle far too low And if you hold your angle too low when you're sharpening, you're not actually hitting that edge. You're sort of just polishing the side of it up. So you can be sanding away all day long and nothing's going to happen. Or they go the other way and they go too steep and they sort of just roll their edge off, which is also not doing you any good. So one thing you can do is you can get a couple of coins and you can put them on your sharpening stone, and then you can put your knife flat on the side of those coins, and you can kind of use that as sort of a very, very rough guide of roughly 20 degrees. Obviously, it doesn't always work, but you want to kind of get a 20-degree angle and sort of work with it from there. Another thing that a lot of guys don't do is they don't spend enough time with their rougher grits. They sort of just go through it too quickly. So they might have gone to Bunnings or whatever and bought a combination stone, and they might do, 1 or 2 licks of the rough stone, 1 or 2 licks of the medium stone, and then 1 or 2 of the fine stone, expect it to be done. The majority of your work is done with your lower grit stones. That's where you're establishing that apex, that sharp edge. And then after that, you can sort of jump up the grits fairly quickly. But you really got to spend a lot of time with your low grits, get at those nicks, get at those rolls, any of those imperfections, and establish that edge. What you're trying to do is you're trying to establish a burr, which is the steel is getting so thin that it's starting to collapse under its own weight. Once you've created that burr, and you'll see it and you'll even feel it, it's like a little wire edge on the side of it. You want to start working your way up and polishing it off, and you'll have an absolutely razor sharp edge, provided you don't roll over and knock the edge off halfway through sharpening.
Yeah, okay. So that's one of the things I know. Look, as I said, I've tried a few different sort of ways in doing it, and some I'm really happy with, some not so much. The latest one I've got, it holds the angle for you like with a steel rod, and you can set that 20 degrees. It locks your blade in, and then you just go across it. And I just found that's the most consistent for me to use, as opposed to doing it with my, just off my hand or on just a stone itself. And one of the ways I've been doing it might be good or bad. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because as I said, I'm definitely no expert in it, is I tend to use a bit of a marker on the edge to make sure that I'm trying to get that right angle and make it even as even as possible. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's a perfect way of doing it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's a whole bunch of systems. I think Edge Pro or Edge Pro, and then Lansky is a very popular one. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Some of the cheaper ones you might have to really they might not be made to the best standards, but they're also great if that's what you want to do. And you'll find that you're sort of limited in what you can do. Like, they're only really good for knives that are maybe 4 or 5 inches long, depending on brand. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. I recommend them all the time to guys.
So you've moved into sort of the hunting area with your knives.
Mm-hmm.
How's the uptake and how's the feedback been on them? Do you get people that use them and then hit you up and say, hey, could you do this? Could you change it up? Or do people just go, yep, buy it, and they're just happy?
A bit of both. I've got a few good friends that are active hunters, and I'll give them knives and they'll go out and they'll do their thing and they'll give me feedback. But as far as the knives going out, I mean, we sell them as fast as we can make them, more or less. The feedback we usually get from customers is, can I buy another one? So I'm, more than happy with that. It's been absolutely great for the business and great for the brand.
That's really good to hear. I think I'm very big, and I've pushed it a lot, is that I do like to support Australian companies where possible. And there's one of those things is on the back that we saw it with, like, sort of in the firearms industry, especially during COVID when things were locked down. We just didn't have access to things. And at the moment, it's very similar with ammunition and, the current global situation with Ukraine and now Israel and Palestine is that it seems to be ramping up, and that impacts ammo across the board, and Australia sort of rates down low. So when you're talking international manufacturers, we're not a big market. So anything in-house is a real win for me. Is there any formal qualification or training to do this? I know you said you dabbled with it before school and then went full time, but is there anything from a TAFE qualification or a apprenticeship or anything like that for someone that might be interested in it?
There is absolutely nothing, unfortunately.
Yeah, wow.
Every single knife maker that I know is more or less self-taught. We're such a small industry. There is no regulation. There is nothing like that for us. So every time you meet someone, we've sort of figured it out ourselves, or, burnt through enough steel and broken enough fingers to sort of, figure it out, I guess.
That shocks me a little bit, that there's nothing there to learn from, that pretty much everyone's either self-taught or has to sort of, along that way. That's pretty I mean, it's impressive for all the knife makers out there because there's some great bits of gear that I see going around all the time.
There are like classes that you do. Like there are knife making classes, but they're like a weekend thing. They're not like a TAFE
Yeah,
course.
it's not like like a university degree
No,
or
there's
a
nothing
TAFE
like that.
course.
As far as I'm
okay,
aware.
No, well, I've never heard of any. That's why I asked the question, because I'm sort of sitting here going, I've never heard of anyone going to TAFE to, make knives. And it makes it really interesting. Have you found social media censors you at all because you are making knives and that's what you're pushing out into the sort of, the digital world?
Yes and no. I think there's a lot of people that think they're getting censored on social media, but oftentimes it could be their content isn't all that great. That's where I was. I find that everyone was saying, oh, it's because Instagram doesn't like weapons. And I'm sure that's part of it. I'm sure there is a certain element where Instagram's not pushing it. But I recently started putting a lot of effort into my Instagram videos and my everything, all my reels and all that sort of stuff. And I don't feel like I'm censored anymore. The content is just better. And I think it's getting pushed a lot better. I think there's a little bit of especially among knife makers, they're not very great at advertising themselves typically. They do the least amount of advertising possible, and then they'll throw their hands up in the air and say, Instagram's not helping me. That's sort of the case for everyone. Like, you got to really push it and you got to give something, you got to make content that's worth people's time. Like, you can put pictures of knives up every single day, but that gets boring quick. A knife is a knife is a knife at some point, So I personally like to do the build videos, a little, action videos of making them, because A, it keeps things fresh, and B, it also lets people know that these knives are actually made in Australia. There's a few companies that say made in Australia on their website, and I know for a fact they're buying them from Taiwan and screwing them together and slapping made in Australia on the side of them. So personally, I like to prove it that it's being made here. Like, you can go in here, you can see the saws, you can see the grinders, you can see the machines running. Like, this is not green screen. This is actually being made in this country.
And that's how we started talking. I caught your gear and just went, this is cool. I'm super interested. I like the videos. I find myself when they pop up and it's one of your manufacturing ones, I watch it to the end because I'm really fascinated. And that's why I reached out and said, hey, you're interested in coming on? I'm really glad you did, because it is one of those things that I don't think many people, and I might be wrong here, but I don't think many people really know the ins and outs of. It's like anything. I think people just sometimes take for granted all these cool toys that we get and have, and they actually don't know how it's made, or they might not be interested. But for me, that's something I'm really fascinated. I like the nitty gritty and the bits and bolts of everything that I sort of do. So I thoroughly enjoy what you're doing. Let's talk about the water blaster. That is a cool bit of kit. How do you program that to cut the edge? Like, are you manually operating it, or is there some sort of algorithm or shape that you program for it to cut? Like, how does that work?
So the water jet machines, I don't have them in-house. There is a local company, which is MRC Water Jet Solutions. They are 2Ks away, right? They're right around the corner. So a water jet machine, it's sort of like a pressure washer attached to like a CNC moving table. And what it's doing is it's picking up sand or like an abrasive garnet, and it is firing it at very, very fast speed through the steel. So the way I explain it to people is, imagine a piece of string, right, made out of abrasive sand, and it is soaring and abrading its way through the metal. Now, what I typically do is I'll give those guys a CAD file. So I'll draw exactly what I want on software, and I'll give it to them, and they'll either, they'll follow my preferences about how it's sort of cut. So I can say, hey, I want this finish here, cut it on the outside and the inside of the line. They're really, really cool bits of kit. I would never want to own one because they're an absolute nightmare. They sort of tear themselves apart all day long. But being able to use other people's machinery, I'll absolutely do that all day long.
I'd be guessing they're pretty damn expensive as well, because there's probably a lot to them, and they'd be, as you said, they'd be running a long time, and like any machine, it just wears out over time.
Yeah, they're not cheap. The last time I looked at them, they were about $250,000 a pop, and because they're all they do is fire sand at high pressure, they more or less tear themselves apart. You'll go through pumps and motors and everything except the bed is sort of what you get told, right? Everything rips itself apart and tears itself apart, and you're constantly replacing parts and fixing it. But they're cool machines. I'd love one day, but we'll see.
Yeah, they are cool. I do thoroughly enjoy watching them work, but and it fascinates me how water can cut through steel. That's just amazing. How do you work it? Like, so do you guys buy in like a big sheet of steel and work out how you can maximize the cuts of the knife to then cut out as many as possible? Are they smaller bits? Like, how does that sort of come about?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So I typically buy in sheets of steel. So we'll import them from America typically. That's where most of the stuff comes from, a little bit from Germany, but most of it's from America. And so we'll get these big sheets of steel, and then we use a nesting software to sort of get all the designs, and it'll automatically, with some sort of AI algorithm or something, nest all the knives in that sheet of steel, and then we send it.
That obviously minimizes wastage. So you're not, because you're paying for every inch of steel.
Mm-hmm.
You might not know off the top of your head, but how many knives would you get out of like a one sheet?
So a sheet of steel is about $1,000, and we get about 60 knives out of it.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty good.
It's not too bad. Steel is the cheapest part out of a knife by far. It's all labor. That's what you're paying for.
I was going to say, is it labor that's the most expensive?
Yeah, 100%. That's one of the things you you have to educate your customers about, because they can go online and they say, oh, you can buy this piece of steel for this much. Like, why is it so expensive? It's because we're paying first-rate wages. We're paying, super and work cover and all that sort of thing. And we're doing it properly. We're not screwing people over and, making these knives in horrible third world conditions.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Is that sometimes it is a little bit more expensive, but you are keeping money local into the economy. You also know it's being made. As you said, there's superannuation, there's insurances, there's rent. Like it's a whole scheme of things that you're paying for when you're just buying that finished product. I think some people, we tend to overlook that as a consumer. So I'm not sure if you make them, but the Damascus blades with that cool little pattern, how the hell does that come about?
I've done a little bit of it. It's not my core thing, so I've done it once or twice in 10 years. But essentially the idea is they get two pieces of steel that are different, so two different alloys of steel, and they smash them together under heat. So when that happens, you create sort of a forge weld where it'll stick themselves together, and you'll have kind of one piece of steel, kind of not, And then from then you can cut it. So you've got this one chunk of steel that's made out of multiples, cut it and fold it over. Then you double it up, cut it and fold it over, cut it and fold it over until you get sort of the desired pattern that you kind of want. And then there's some guys that get real crazy and they'll cut it in different ways and they'll stack it in different ways and they'll create these crazy intricate mosaic patterns.
That sounds like a hell of a lot more work than your average knife.
Oh yeah, it is brutal back-breaking labor.
Well, I was going to say that, is it a physical job, like when you're doing it? Like, there's some parts that are, like, it's all manual labor, I appreciate that, but is some parts really tough to do?
It is very hard on your body. Yeah, no, it is absolutely hard on your body. It's a very physical sort of a job, so you might not be lifting heavy things all day, but your body does cop a lot of abuse. You spend a lot of time sort of hunched over machinery. Your hands absolutely take a flogging. I mean, for obvious reasons, everything's sharp and pointy, as well as lungs. It's not great breathing half this shit in all day. But then again, there's the guys that forge and they really, they go through joints in their shoulders and elbows and all sorts of nasty shit.
Why is that in the forge? Is that because they're swinging more?
They're swinging a hammer all day long. That's more or less it. We tend to avoid all that sort of stuff just to sort of, for longevity as well as production reasons. We use more of a stock removal approach. So we buy a piece of steel and cut away everything that's not a knife pretty much. Whereas other guys will buy a steel and bash it around for a bit and make a knife that way.
Do you have any lightweight blades? So can we talk about the range you make for hunters? Because it's obviously as a hunting podcast. Mm-hmm. I do encourage everybody. We'll give you the social media sort of sites at the end so you can get out and check out Dom's stuff. But what's the range that you guys produce for hunters?
So I've got three that I sort of push guys towards when they sort of ask what they can use. The first one is the very lightweight knife that we call the Surgeon. So it's a little sort of a scalpel looking thing. They come out to 44 grams, don't quote me on that, but something like that, real lightweight with the sheath and everything. So really lightweight package, completely flat. You can just disappears. under a shirt. You can hang it around your neck. You can put it on your belt, in your bag. Takes up very little space, but razor sharp edge. The next size up, we call that the Infernum. So that's about a 3 and a bit inch blade, very traditional sort of a shape. Again, compact, sort of easy to carry, put in your bag, that sort of stuff. And then the size up from that is the Marauder, which is the most recent design that we do. And that's a full-size knife, full-size handle where you can do a lot more stuff with it as well. It's great for around the camp. You know, you can cut wood with it, do all your sort of campsite sort of stuff with it as well.
So the Marauder is more like a bushcraft sort of
bit of
knife.
Everything. So
yeah, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then on the butchering side, so obviously, you know, that's the element of hunting, the out in the field sort of stuff. Do you then have a range for people that are in the kitchen cutting up the different pieces of meat to put on the table?
Back at home sort of a thing?
Yeah. So like you've got the 3 hunter versions, but then do you have anything further for hunters to use at home around the kitchen?
Not yet. We can only make so many knives, so that's a future project. We make one kitchen knife and that's about it.
Well, I was going to say, like, how many different knives do you make? Because listening to what you say, it's a time-consuming process, and I can't imagine you having hundreds of different models.
No, we've got it less than 10.
There you go. All right, so less than 10. And how did you sort of come up with that 10 is the way to go to put out into the marketplace?
We'll make more as time goes on. 10 is sort of where we sort of found our limit at this stage. Every single time we make a new knife, there's a whole bunch of research and development that goes into it. There's a lot of testing that goes into it to make sure they work. And once that's done and we like the design, we also want to improve the design as it goes along. So at some point, I can only manage a certain amount of knives. As time goes on and we have maybe some more manpower, that goes up. But about that number works for us just to sort of keep things good and keep these. If I'm putting my name on them, I want them to be quality. So having that slightly smaller catalog helps me keep the quality up. But that being said, as time goes on, I'm not dicking around and changing my designs and modifying designs that much. So the older designs, we can sort of leave them be. They've been sorted, they've been tested. And then we can start adding new ones as the older designs get more seasoned. Then we sort of add new stuff in. So I try and have 2 or 3 new designs per year, don't always succeed, but sort of go down that route where I can still have more models, but not have so many that I sort of just overwhelm people and just start pumping out crap.
Yeah, so the motto is quality over quantity is what you're aiming for.
Absolutely.
You talked about research and development there. How long would it take to, you know, and obviously every knife's different, but how long would it take for you to sort of come up with the idea of having one, make a prototype, test it out to actually manufacturing? What sort of time frame are we talking?
It really depends on the knife and how complex it is. If it's something really simple, not much time at all, but typically about 3-4 months, I'd say. That being said, it's because we're doing other things. We're not focused on this one thing for 3-4 months. It's sort of in and around everything else we do. Once that design is then sorted, we also then go ahead and we add we make all the jigs and the fixturing and the programming and do everything else besides that to actually make the knife, which is that's really what slows things down. Even after the design's made, actually figuring out how to make what you've designed, that's where a lot of guys sort of fall short. There's a lot of knife makers out there and they do a lot of great work, but it's usually a rude awakening for guys when they realize how hard it is to make hundreds of something versus 1 or 2 things, right? When you make hundreds, there is a lot more upfront work than there would be if you just made 1 or 2.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with Joe Rogan and Elon Musk the other day, and he was calling for a movie to be made on manufacturing because he felt that people don't understand that the design part is super easy. It's the rest that follows, trying to get like a scaling process on manufacturing and get them out and being able to turn them out. He was talking about his Cybertruck, and it was super interesting going, not many people really know how long things take to manufacture and the large sort of scale you need to be able to do and how long that takes. So it's interesting you say that.
Yeah, it's a common thing. There is so much more work past the design stage that guys don't know about. And we're tiny. Like we're barely making knives compared to some of these massive companies. But even for us, without, with our batch sizes, it is months of work and figuring out processes and systems to sort of get the job done. Now, you can, hack away at it with angle grinders and brute force and ignorance, and that works too. But if you're making hundreds of them, you don't have that consistency across the product. You're going to have some knives that are great and some knives that are duds. It's just sort of the nature of humans and human work. So you need those jigs and those fixtures and that process reliability to have quality product again and again and again and again. It's one of the most brutal things and one of the most difficult things that I do on a daily basis is trying to keep manufacturing going and to hit manufacturing targets and keeping things on track, because it is so easy for you to fall 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks behind. It's, just today we had one of our machines just wouldn't turn on. So now we're rushing around scrambling, trying to figure out how we're going to fill the rest of this week because a sensor or something decided it wasn't happy today, and that can easily push everything back a month. That snowball effect of having to move things around and shuffle things around really just slows everything down and really just pushes out time frames. It makes it tough to sort of keep things moving. It blows my mind how things are made and actually supplied all across the world, more or less. It's just mind-blowing how these things are achieved.
It's interesting, and this is not meant to be disrespectful in any way, but yeah, think of a knife compared to, like, I don't know, a car with so many moving parts and machine parts. I'm with you there. How that comes together and how we mass manufacture them, it sort of blows your mind a little bit that there's so many out there, because it's, as you said, there can be a long process in making a knife, and there's not that many moving parts in a knife compared to a car.
Oh, yeah.
And you sit there and go, man, how, just the assemble and every different part, and it's crazy. It's insane.
Yeah, it's a miracle that cars work. Like the amount of things that have to work in a car every single time perfectly for this thing to start when you turn the key and just to go, right? There's so many little parts and components that have to work within micro precision. Otherwise, things blow up and they just don't work at all.
And the longevity of cars nowadays. I just, I look at the cars that I have had over my sort of years, and I don't seem to have half the amount of issues with the new cars that I did previously. And I've always been one of buying a new car just because you know what you're getting. I've had some terrible ones, but I've had some really good ones as of late too, that a lot of people will bag me out because I drive the Mitsubishi Triton. But I'll tell you what, compared to, I had a Holden Commodore SS that was just an absolute nightmare, and everything that could go wrong pretty much did go wrong. Whereas the Mitzi, it hasn't missed a beat. It's been fantastic, knock on wood.
Yeah, it's the pace that technology sort of goes. It's crazy and how reliable these things get now. I mean, I've got the same car and I've never had an issue with it. My last car was a Ford Falcon, and granted, it was not the best kept Ford Falcon, but just to have a car now that runs and turns on every single time and is reliable, I'm with you. It's so much nicer than having to, fix exhausts and this is not working, that's not working, the air compressor's kicked itself, it's nice.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. How did the change come? Because you said you were doing high-end sort of knife making and more for sort of like art and things like that, then came into hunting. Did that just come about because of your mates, or?
I'm going to be very vague about this. I got horrifically screwed over, and it was a situation where it was change or starve, more or less. I can't get too specific about it, but yeah, it was not a long-term planned decision, really. It was something I was very much, I wouldn't say forced to, because it was always sort of there, but there was a catalyst that sort of really forced my hand in a way and made everything happen a lot quicker than I originally planned.
And now, how many of the hunting knives would you make a year, do you reckon?
Hunting knives or everything?
Bit of both.
Well over 1,000, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good numbers.
Yeah, well, I mean, for Australia it is, yeah.
Yeah, so what are you talking, 3 a day?
Something like that.
Roughly.
It's about 150, 200 a month, something like that. Maybe 100 on less successful months.
Yeah, okay. So that's still pretty good numbers for a small business in Australia, which is good to see.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you looked at getting knives into like sort of gun shops and things like that, or is it all direct, to the consumer?
I'd love to do more of it. We work with Aussie Outback Supplies quite a bit. I'm out in Perth, and they buy a few of my knives, but we just don't have the capacity. Like, we can't make knives fast enough. So if X gun shop wants knives from me, great, but I've got none to give you. That's sort of where we're at right now.
How many people work in the company?
Just myself and my brother.
Just you and your brother. Okay, so how does that go, working with your brother? Because I love my brother, but geez, I don't think I could work with him, that's for sure.
We're very similar people, which really helps. We get along really, really well. It's one of the best things we ever did, to be honest. He sort of does his thing and I'll do my thing, and we sort of work at different ends of the shop. It's not too bad at all. And then we can go to knife shows together, and because we're brothers, we sort of understand each other better, I think. Like, especially if we go into a knife show, I don't have to tell him do X, do this, this, and this, and this. He just sort of knows, and he'll do things the way I'll do things because, again, we're brothers. So it's been absolutely great.
That's good to hear because I understand my brother as well, and that's probably why we both know we couldn't work with each other. But that he's good value, but I think we are too much of the same personality too, and I think that's more for clashing and butting heads. But mate, where's the future lie? What do is there? You sort of touched on it a little before about potentially expanding and getting bigger and having more. Is that is there a long-term plan, or you just keep going the way you're going because you're happy with how the business is progressing?
Absolutely. I want to grow the business. Like, this is really what I'm passionate about, like growing and bringing more Australian manufacturing to people. That's where I really get my kicks in the business. In the early days, it was knife making, but at some point you've made enough knives. Like, I'm not excited in the morning to go and, do the same thing every day. But growing and learning all these new manufacturing techniques and bringing in new machinery and learning how to run these machines, because they're the craziest little robots you've ever seen. So I really want to bring in more robots. That's the big thing. We've got a couple now, but as time goes on, I want to bring in more machines, some more people, and really just sort of bring this to more people, I guess. Do more shows. I'd love to start doing some of the outdoor shows and the hunting shows and the gun shows as time goes on, and get out of this little niche that I've been in, because usually I've just sort of worked within the knife industry, and I go to knife shows and all that sort of stuff. But I want to sort of do more and make more and grow the business, I guess. Absolutely is the long way of saying it.
So, warranty on the knives. What do your knives come with from a warranty standpoint?
Lifetime. Like, if it's broken, I'll fix it.
Wow.
Within reason. If you've been a dick with it, I can usually tell. But we've had thousands of knives shipped out over the years, and I might have had less than 10 come back broken. But we've taken care of just about everyone. I can't think of a single instance where we've ever not taken care of somebody if they've had an issue.
Do you ever have like customers ring up and say, I've been doing this with it and it's dulled it, or any sort of complaints like that in the sense of how they've been using it? Is there some tips or tricks for you to say, hey, with a knife, do this, and it's probably going to keep the edge as best possible for you to use over a long period of time?
Absolutely. So there's two things that will absolutely kill your knife that I run into all the time. The first is glass chopping boards or granite chopping boards or anything like that. Any material that's harder than the actual knife, plates especially, you're going to destroy your edge in seconds, because you're taking your sharp knife and you're hammering it against a hard surface. No edge is going to stand up to that, right? It's just not going to happen. So that's really one of the big things that I run into all the time. Another one is guys who are hunters who've got like an animal that's completely covered in dust and mud and all sorts of sand and stuff like that. That fur covered in all that dirt, that's like 36 grit sandpaper. So it is just going to ruin your edge. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just the nature of the beast. It's just such an abrasive, coarse, nasty material, especially with pigs, where it's just going to kill your edge more or less.
Is there something hunters could potentially do out in the field to try and minimize that damage to the knife?
If you can try and cut the least amount of cuts, realistically is the best way, I'd sort of say, if you can dick around with it the least possible. And it's going to be heresy for me to say, but like the disposable little scalpel bladed things are absolutely great. I know I'm sort of shooting myself in the foot here, but they're a great invention. I don't know what people are buying hunting knives for.
Look, I'm not going to lie. I have one. They are a little fiddly though, like having replaceable blades, and then there's a little contraption you need to, use them and things like that. But I do tend to find I bounce between. They have different purposes and the like as well. I don't know. There's something attractive about having a good knife, like just on you or on the belt, whereas I just feel those little scalpel ones, I don't know, just it's not the same feeling of having it out there,
Yeah, it's not as John Wayne.
Yeah, pretty much. Maybe that's the thing. I just like to look the part. Maybe, I don't know. Mate, look, that's super interesting. I'm really glad you came on the podcast and we could have a bit of a chat about it, because there's some things there that I find fascinating in how it's made, how it's done. As I said, and I'll say it again, I really enjoy what you're doing with your social media and how things are made and putting it out there. It does always catch my eye, and I tend to stick around and watch the whole thing. Where are people finding you and the business and the products?
DB Blades. Just search that. You'll find us everywhere. We have YouTube, DB Blades, Instagram, DB Blades again, TikTok, DB Blades again, Facebook, DB Blades again. So just search DB Blades. You'll find us just about everywhere. Our website is dbblades.com. And that's where you'll find us.
Mate, sounds fantastic. I will put links in the show notes, guys. So if you do want to check it out and make your life even easier, just jump onto the show notes of wherever you're getting the podcast, click on the link and it'll take you straight there. Dom, mate, I really appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for coming on the podcast and giving us a bit of info about your products and, some tips and tricks as well, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in and bye for now. If you have a topic, guest, question, or any gear that you want to hear about on the podcast, shoot us an email, australianhuntingandbeyond@gmail.com. Alternatively, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All the links are in the show notes. If you haven't already, make sure you give us a review and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.